couple of things. One is that, first of all, the group that was at Mass yesterday, really a beautiful job. And I know you probably think I'm just saying this every week, but it has been quite moving for those of us who are involved in just seeing the organization of the Masses, and just a tremendous job for all of us today. So thank you very much. I don't know if that's going to stay on. Let's see. Second, this evening, yeah, that's going to cut it, I don't think. But I have the other one ready, Father Steve. This evening, your guest speaker is going to be, once again, Father Steve. Oh, come on. Let's try that again. This evening, Father Steve. Woo-hoo! And he is going to be speaking on reconciliation. That will help you prepare for next week, when everyone will have the opportunity to go to confession. Teachers, the only thing I'd like to point out, and then I'll get off the microphone, but teachers, there is a time schedule that we've given you so that some classes will start next week's class session in the church. So if you're scheduled for the church, it's on the yellow half sheet of paper, if you're scheduled in the church, could you just let your students know that that's where they will meet you? And then, after confession, you can bring your classes back to class. The others will start down there at 7:35. So there'll be some students starting in the church, some starting here. Just take a look at the timesheet. If you have any questions, then just give us a call and we'll explain it and all. Also, you have materials attached to your attendance sheets that you can use this evening. That is to go over how to go to confession. Students can bring those home with them this evening. Next week, we've got small cards that they can use when they go to confession. So we're going to make sure everybody is in great shape for confession next week. I think that's it. I think that we have one more Mass. I do know we have one more Mass before Christmas. So there are a couple of teachers who just need to let us know which students would want to minister, and we'll get that back to you. A reminder that for this month, we have class 2 weeks in a row. So this evening and then next week. Okay? And with that, unless there's any questions, I think we can turn this over to Father Steve.
Okay, tonight I want to spend a little time with you and talk about something very, very serious, but not easy to talk about, nor is it the most pleasant thing to talk about. And it's the reality of sin. Sin is part of, unfortunately, remains a part of our human condition, even though Christ gives us that way out. Christ calls us to live without sin. With Christ by our side, we can live without sin. But the temptation to sin is part of our human condition. And I guess that's a better way to say it. Sin is a part of our human condition because temptation is a part of our human condition. So far this year, we've talked about our relationship with Christ. We've talked about how Christ formed his early disciples. And he did so, and like all relationships, it takes time. It takes time for a relationship to grow. And so he was very present to them. They listened to him, they learned from him, they grew in that relationship from the first time that he called them. He said, "Come follow me," and many of them heard that call and they followed him. But if you go into Scripture, you will see that some of those people who made the commitment to follow Christ didn't always live it out. I think, of course, of Judas, who, as you know, was the one that ratted out Jesus told those who were looking for him to arrest him where they could find him. And he did it so that he could get a few pieces, get some money, basically. So he sold him out. We think of St. Peter, who Jesus appointed as, he called him the rock on which he would build his church. And he entrusted Peter with great responsibility of all the other disciples and apostles. But even Peter, on that time, that day that Jesus was arrested, denied Jesus 3 times. People went up and said to him, "You've been hanging with him." And he said, "I don't know the man." And then someone else came up and said, "No, I think I saw you with him." And I don't know him. You're mistaken. This was the night before Jesus died. He had been with Christ for 3 years. Christ had entrusted so much to him, and in the end, he ran away. If you go and you look in your Bibles of Christ's crucifixion, one would think these people who gave their life for Christ, dropped everything and followed him, you would think they would be right underneath that cross with him. And yet, they were nowhere to be found, except there was one disciple and the Blessed Mother that remained under the cross. All the others went in hiding. And so, if those disciples, those followers of Christ, those men who made that commitment to follow in Jesus, didn't always live up to the relationship, I think it is fair to say that we too might not always live up to that relationship as well. That relationship with Christ was formed on the day that we were baptized. And on the day that we were baptized, we entered into relationship with Christ. But where is that relationship now? And that's what we need to talk about a little bit tonight. That's what we need to talk about. What weakens that relationship? Or what breaks that relationship? Now, like all of our relationships with others, imperfections can set in. You can have a great relationship with a friend of yours. You can spend time with him or her, on the phone with them, texting, sharing your life, allowing them to share their life with you, hanging out with them, maybe being on the same team with them. But then, and I'm sure this has already happened to you, particularly as you've gone into high school. Maybe you had a lot of friends, whether it be at St. Mary's or at Qualters or whatever elementary school you went to. And then all of a sudden those friendships kind of fall apart. They're not as strong as they used to be. Sometimes those friendships just fall apart or aren't as strong as they used to be because of neglect. Maybe we took that person for granted. Maybe we did wrong things. There are different reasons why relationships wither and fade and weaken and break. But I would venture to say for all of you right now, you can think of 1, maybe 2, maybe even 3 relationships in your life that have weakened, maybe have totally broke. What happened? Well, just like our relationships with one another can weaken and break because of neglect, or because of intentional things we do, or maybe because we just take them for granted, and we don't work on them, because all relationships need to continuously have an effort made to keep them going. And if that's true with our relationships with one another, the exact same thing is true with our relationship with Christ. It's a relationship, like all relationships, that unless we continue to work at the relationship, it can wither, it can fade, it can break. It can wither and fade because of neglect. One of the most challenging things I know you as young people face is now your life becomes busier and busier. You're up earlier now that you're in high school. You're probably going to bed later because of sports, different activities, because of more homework that you have. Life is becoming more filled. Things were a lot easier, weren't they, about 5 years ago when you were kids? There was a routine. There was a, okay, say for example, you went to church on Sunday. Well, you could go to the 9 o'clock Mass. You didn't have too many other things going on. A lot of that has changed now. And sadly, the first thing that tends to fall into neglect is our prayer time. And particularly, our prayer time as a community, coming to Mass. Because I know, I look out at you, and here is a class ready to be confirmed, and some of you have neglected that commandment to keep holy the Lord's Day. Neglect in a relationship can damage it permanently. And we have to acknowledge in our own life when we haven't made that effort. Sometimes it's intentionally things that we do or say that can affect our relationship with God and with others. One of the best ways to kind of look, and when you go back to your class, you're going to be working on this, is we're going to look at the 10 Commandments. It's still a great standard to look at, to recognize and see how things are going in our relationship with God and with others. The first 3 commandments are to do with our relationship with God. Keeping holy the Lord's Day. That's one of those commandments. I am the Lord your God. You shall not have other gods before me. The other 7 commandments at the end, after those first 3, are all to do with our relationships with others. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not kill. You should not commit adultery or misuse the gift of your sexuality, or lie. These are very clear commandments that God gave to us to keep us in right relationship with Him and with others. If we want good, solid, right relationship, there has to be some type of standard that you and I follow. So one way to kind of check out how things are going with my relationship with God and my relationship with others is to look prayerfully at those 10 commandments. And in preparation for celebrating the sacrament of reconciliation, one of the most important things in the sacrament is the time of preparation, which is now going to be placed in your hands for 1 week. A lot of times when you guys went to confession here in religious ed, you were in your classroom and all of a sudden Mrs. Westland or Sister Ann or Father Bill opened the door and said, "Okay, come on, we're going to confession." And remember when you were kids, you stood like at the door over there when we did the confessions here? Or for those who were at St. Mary's, you had a little bit more prep, but not a heck of a lot. Pretty much on the Monday, your teacher would say, "Okay, tomorrow you're going down to confession." And that does give us a lot of time to kind of examine ourselves and take a look and say, how is that relationship with God right now? Now you might say, I have more important things to worry about. Let me tell you, this is the foundation on everything else. Your relationship with God, your relationship with others. It's so, so very important. And if we don't examine our lives and see where we need to maybe have some attitude adjustment or relationship adjustment, we're bound to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. Some of you know one of the Patriots is a member of this parish, the backup quarterback, Brian Hoyer, and he's a friend of mine. I prepared him and his wife last year to get married, and so we're pretty good friends. And as I'm in the habit of doing is, I'll send him an email the day before the game, or sometimes, a couple of days before the game, and I'll just say, I'm saying a prayer for you today. And after yesterday, and sometimes he'll email me back. And I emailed him last night and I said, "You got the day off tomorrow?" And he emailed me back and he said, "I got a tough day tomorrow. We're going to watch the films." Do you know what that means? Watching the films means they go back and they watch the game, or portions of the game. You think, no, I TiVo the game and I'll go back and I'll watch portions of the game to be entertained. Why do you think they watch the game? Over and over and over again. Yes. To correct their mistakes. I would not want to be, how many of you watched the game yesterday? I would, even though they won, I would not want to be in that room today with Bill Belichick. They almost blew it. They were ahead, 31-3? And it all boiled down to recovering an onside kick. If one mistake had been made, if they had missed that onside kick and the Colts had got it back, they could have possibly tied, maybe even won. I would not want to be in that room watching those films. It's painful. But They're watching those films so that they can correct their mistakes. They're very talented, but they neglected a lot yesterday. They took themselves for granted yesterday, didn't they? Oh, what are we, 8-3, they're 0-32, whatever they are. And they took it all for granted. So they need to look at those films, review those films. I'm sure it wasn't pleasant to do, but because they will do it, I have a feeling you won't see that attitude too many more times this year. Going to confession and this examination of looking at our life and seeing our relationship with God in light of the commandments and our relationship with others in light of the last 7 commandments is kind of like looking at the films and saying, where did I not make the play? Where did I screw up? Where did I drop the ball? It's not easy to see. It's not easy to look at. But then when you get over the, oh, I'm awful at this and that, then you say, well, maybe if I tried this, or maybe if I avoided this, or maybe if I changed my stance, or maybe if I changed a little bit of my attitude, or maybe if I changed my position, maybe I could avoid that. So the first time of looking at the films doesn't feel good. Sin doesn't feel good when we look at it in our own life. If we're honest with ourselves, it shouldn't feel good. If it doesn't feel anything for you, we got a problem here. If you say, well, I sin, but of course everyone sins, and yeah, no, come on, I didn't kill anybody. But it's the little things that gradually take us off our game and on our road. I mentioned this at Mass yesterday when Isaiah the prophet said, prepare the way of the Lord, prepare that path for him, make that path straight. Well, sin is, I would say, for the most part, small cracks in the pavement. Now there's some big cracks too. There's different types of sin. There's venial sin, which is those small cracks. And then there's mortal sins. Another way to say fatal sins that can do permanent damage. But let's not kid ourselves. Those little venial sins, a lie here, a swear here, more serious sins, miss a mass here, they build up. And then, I don't know about you, I would pride myself on not swearing. I would pride myself on not swearing. When I was in high school, even for a while in college, I pride myself. I don't have to say those words. Then I said it. then the second time it was easier. And then the third time was easier. And then before you know it, I was swearing up a storm. And I had to take a review at some point and step back and say, what are you doing? You know that's not the way you should talk. You know that's not the way you should act. It just became easy. The first drink. Ooh. The second, the third, next week, next month. It becomes easier. And then we start finding people who do the same thing, and then we don't think it's a sin anymore. Because everybody does it. And the only thing that says is everyone sins. Doesn't make it right. But it shows that the human condition is prone to falling into sin. But Christ has given us a way to reverse that trend. And that's called the sacrament of reconciliation. Confession. Just like looking at the films, it's not easy. But we believe, like all sacraments, that we receive the grace of God. We receive God's presence in our life in two ways in the sacrament of reconciliation. One is forgiveness, if we're truly sorry. The second is His grace and strength to help us to go out and try not to do that again. And so if you're taking your relationship somewhat seriously with God, you have to take seriously the reality and truth of sin. And the Church, through the sacrament, gives us a way to seriously say, I want to try better. I want this relationship to grow. I am sorry. Sorrow has to be a part of confession next week. If not, you can go in there, you can say the words, you can do this, you can walk out. But if there isn't sorrow in our heart, they're empty words. And so, over this week, what we're going to try to do, this is up to you. Now, I've been doing this enough time to know that some of you won't do a thing with this and come in next week and will be expected to be as ready as the person who's spent the whole week preparing. The advantages of preparing is that next week, that sacrament will mean something to you. You will have an experience that you maybe have not experienced or felt before, because you've gotten ready. You've prepared yourself. It's not easy. And that's why over this week, what we're going to do is ask you to do a couple of things. 3 things, actually. Number one, when you go back into the classroom, you're going to look at the formula, how to go to confession. And it basically boils down to 3 things. It involves, first of all, acknowledging your sin, saying, this is what I did. And it has to be a little more than, I sin. But you need to look at yourself and say, how have I not been faithful to the relationship with God and with others? Has it been in lack of charity towards others? Has it been in just a lousy attitude towards my parents? Has it been misuse of this powerful gift of sexuality that you have discovered in your own life? And say, I don't know what to do with this. I really don't know. But I'm asking people, or I'm checking out different things, and I don't know if that's right. You know already. Whether you want to deny knowing, but you know, and say, well, how am I going to get myself in self-control? Self-control is a big part of that. Not oppressing yourself or suppressing yourself, but controlling yourself. Controlling your appetites. Food, drink, sex. They're all appetites. And if we don't control our eating, what's going to happen? We're going to blow up like wood ticks. Well, if you don't control a sexual appetite, you will not be able to enter into a loving, sacred relationship that God might be calling you to down the road. So now's the time. Our mouths. Questions like using the gifts that God has given us already. Are we using those gifts to help others or for ourselves only? These are tough questions, but when we look at that and we say, Lord, I'm sorry I'm such a turd. I'm really sorry that I've acted this way towards my parents, or the way I've treated that girl or that guy, or how I've talked to the person who gave me life, who brought me into this world, who changed my diaper. And now all of a sudden I can't give that person 2 minutes except attitude? Oh my. That's dropping the ball big time. And so, acknowledging your sin is an important part of the sacrament. Saying you're sorry is an important part of the sacrament. And that's where the prayer of the act of contrition comes in. You're going to look at that prayer when you go back to your classroom. You're going to have it with you next week. So you don't have to. It would be great if many of you memorized it like you used to. But I don't want that to be something that, becomes the worry of your life. Oh, what do I, he's going to make me memorize it. No, you'll have it on a card in front of you. So if you can read, you can pray it. So it takes acknowledgement of sin, sorrow for sin, and then forgiveness. And that's where I come in. Because what I do at that moment, right now I'm Father Steve, I think. When you go to confession, whether it's to me or Father Bill, we're going to have about 6, 7 priests with us. So we're going to let you go where you want to go. So if you can't stand me, don't go to me. Because I'll get in the way. I don't want to get in the way. Some of you might say, oh yeah, I want to go to you. That's great. Others might be Father Bill. Or might be, I'd rather go to a priest that doesn't even know me. Or when you go to some of the, down in the church, some of the rooms or areas that you go, you have the opportunity to look at the person face to face. If it was me, I wouldn't want to look at me. But there's a little screen there. So you might want to go behind it and speak through the screen. But whoever you are confessing that sin to, yes, is Father Steve or Father Bill or Father John or Father Dave. But when he says the words, and through the ministry of the church, may God give you pardon and peace, and I absolve you from your sins. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. The priest is acting in the person of Christ. Christ left this power to forgive sins to his apostles. And that's been handed down in the church through the priesthood. Now that doesn't mean you come to me because I am sinless. Far from it. Because like you, I go to confession. Last week, I was on retreat in Manchester, St. Anselm. And that was one of the first things I had to do. I wanted to do. I needed to do. I needed to get myself right with God. If I'm going to go on a retreat for 4 days, the first thing I got to do is kind of patch it up. Those cracks that some stayed small, but some turn into big bloody potholes in my life that swallow me whole. Because I let them go. I neglected them. And so when you go to your classroom, you're going to look at the formula for going to confession. The other thing you're going to do is, as I mentioned, you're going to look at the 10 Commandments and use that paper at home as well to review in your own life look at the films. What I suggest people to do, this is very, very private, is get like an index card. And as you're reviewing the films, write down, I've offended my parents, or I've taken advantage of that person, or I've lied, or I've cheated at school. So that when you come in the following week from tonight, you have that card with you. And it's only you that keep that card. That's not something you ever show to others. And then the other thing that you're going to do this week, I hope, I pray, I wish you will do, I hope you will do, besides looking at the films, is looking at Scripture. I'm going to end with a passage. Peter's going to read the passage now. But as he's reading the passage, I want you to look at this picture that's been behind me. It's done by an artist named Rembrandt, and it's entitled The Prodigal Son. the lost son. And to just point out the figures, before Peter reads it, I'm going to have you use the mic, Pete, okay? This is the father in the story. This is the younger son in the story. This is the older son in the story. We can pray many ways. I invite you maybe to a new type of prayer tonight, by praying using an image, a picture. And so what I'm going to do is, Peter, you want to come over here, please? Because we're going to get out of the way. And what we're going to do, Jeff, will you kill the lights? And Peter, will you come over here, please? Because we're going to get out of the way. And what I'd like all of you to do, as hard as it is with 200 people in a classroom, in a room with your friend by your side, burping and whatever else they're doing, is very, very still through the whole passage. Just fix your eyes on that picture. Okay, you ready? So please try to focus on that. And if you're having problems seeing it, just imagine an old man, a young son, and an older son.
Then he said, "A man had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of your estate that should come to me.' So the father divided the property between them. After a few days, the younger son collected all his belongings and set off to a distant country, where he squandered his inheritance on a life of dissipation. When he had freely spent everything, a severe famine struck that country, and he found himself in dire need. So he hired himself out to one of the local citizens, who sent him to his farm to tend the swine. And he longed to eat his fill of the pods on which the swine fed, but nobody gave him any. Coming to his senses, he thought, 'How many of my father's hired workers have more than enough food to eat, but here I am, dying from hunger. I shall get up and go to my father, and I shall say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Treat me as you would treat one of your hired workers.' So he got up and went back to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father caught sight of him and was filled with compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son.' But his father orders his servants, 'Quickly bring the finest robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Take the fattened calf and slaughter it. Then let us celebrate with the feast, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life again. He was lost and has been found.' Then the celebration began. Now the older son had been out in the field, and, on his way back, as he neared the house, he heard the sound of music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him what this might mean. The servant said to him, 'Your brother has returned, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' He became angry, and when he refused to enter the house, his father came out and pleaded with him. He said to his father in reply, 'Look, all these years I served you, and not once did I disobey your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat to feast on with my friends. But when your son returns, you swallowed up your property with prostitutes. For him you slaughtered the fattened calf.' He said to him, 'My son, you are here with me always, and everything I have is yours. But now we must celebrate and rejoice, because your brother was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found.'"
Thank you, Peter. We're going to break now. Well, what I'm going to do is going to have, excuse me, Matt, just for a minute. These guys are going to hold the picture for you as you're going out there. I know we're going to break this whole kind of good feeling right now and moment by moving chairs, but we're going to have to do that in a few minutes. But after you move the chairs, we're going to bring this picture and we're just going to hold it as you go into your classrooms, right out in the lobby. And I'd like you to just get a close look at it, because I think Rembrandt kind of captured the whole thing. The gentleness and love of the Father, which symbolizes, of course, God the Father, and his compassionate care for the little brat, who basically said, I want my inheritance. Well, what happens when how do you get an inheritance? Person dies. So basically he was saying to his father, I wish you were dead, I want the money now. That's pretty bad. And then he spent all the money on, you can only imagine what. And then, if you look at him when you go out there, his, this was guy of royalty. I mean, they were all like kings, and look at him. He looks a mess. Because he's poor. He doesn't have anything. It's all ripped. His sandals torn. Everything is all dirty. But then he goes back to the Father, and the Father embraces him, welcomes him back, even though he doesn't deserve it. But like us, we don't deserve it. But God, in the sacrament of confession, says, come back to me. I forgive you. And he is sorry because he's kneeling down. The sad thing in this picture, though, is the oldest son. He's separated from them. Because that's what sin does too. When we hold on to grudges, he was mad. Because the little brat had gone and spent all the money, and he stayed at home working. And he was pretty ticked off. And his attitude of anger. And I've seen that already with young people. I've seen it in some of your own lives when you're so angry at somebody that you're almost blinded with rage. Sadly, the story tells us they're having a big party and he's outside because he can't feel in his heart the forgiveness that the Father has felt. And so, guys, why don't you take that out there? Yeah, it's light. And then as you go back to your classroom, just if you want to take a look at it, that's fine.